We redid all the sound yesterday morning in the room, and they tested everything except my sound pack, I think. So we're going to see. Are we working? We're okay? Can I do it? All right. Well, we'll do it. Hands free. And if it fails, I've got a backup here. All right. Well, good morning. Exceedingly good to be with you on this first Sunday of November, and you all look so rested. Don't you just love that fall back thing? And don't you just hate that spring forward thing? Feel completely robbed in the spring. And how many of you can never quite figure out which one it is? You're like, wait, are we losing or gaining or what's going on here? But man, that was awesome to wake up at 2:30 in the morning to a crying baby and go, it is actually 3:30, but I've got an extra hour. So that was a lot of fun last night, and it's so good to be together and to see you here. If you're new here or you've been away, I guess, on some extended fall Viking cruise up in Norway somewhere. I don't know where you've been if you take vacations in the fall, but we've been kind of in the midst of a fall series, and we're kind of starting to round the corner toward the finish line here. Advent is 4 weeks away. Can you believe that? 4 weeks from now, there will be Christmas trees in here and red banners and candles and wreaths, and that's like 4 weeks away, which does not seem possible, but it is. And so we're kind of rounding a bend and heading toward the finish line in a series we started early in the fall called Your Part Matters. We've been exploring together the vital role every one of us plays in the mission of God being lived out and being expressed in the local church here and now. God's mission to make His love for creation known, to pour out His grace and His mercy, whether that's here or whether that's in Cebu in the Philippines, wherever that might take us, to bring reconciliation and restoration to all that is broken, to all that has failed, to all that is disjointed and out of place and just not working. This is God's mission to bring heaven to earth. It's what Jesus talked about when He talked about this idea of a kingdom coming here and now, the kingdom of God. And I honestly don't know if it gets any more exciting than this. I mean, I had this thought this week. You tell me, what other movement can you join today that has the express purpose of bringing restoration, reconciliation, healing, wholeness, and salvation to all that is broken, all that is hurting, all that is disjointed, and all that needs salvation? What other movement can you join today? And what other movement actually says you have a part to play in that mission? You have a vital role to play in making that vision a reality. And so that's why we gather. That's why we do what we do here week in and week out, both on our Sunday morning gatherings and when we gather during the week in homes and at the ministry center. That's why we bake muffins for social workers. That's why we box up 400 or 500 pairs of shoes to put on the feet of children in the Dominican Republic. That's why we serve lunch at Lario Park. That's why we prepare Bible lessons to teach our children in their classes right now and our youth. That's why we do what we do. And I don't know about you, but for me, this has completely reframed and completely transformed the entire experience of why I would want to participate in the life of a local church. This is what compels me. And I happen to think that we live within a culture that is looking for something more compelling than the American dream. And I happen to think that we exist within a religious culture that is starved for something more compelling than a few songs and a feel-good sermon before we gather again the next week. All right, end of sermon number one. That was kind of unintended, sermon number one, and a roundabout way to introduce what I kind of want to talk about today. Last night, I got inspired to write something, and I did something I wrote something I've never written before. I've actually never done this, but it's very rabbinic. I wrote a parable. I just sat down and I was sitting in the ministry center over in downtown, and it was like late at night, and I was kind of putting some things together for this. And I don't know why I got inspired to write a parable, but if you study like the rabbinical literature around like First Temple or Second Temple Jewish time, the rabbis taught in parables. That's why when you open the Gospels, the primary modality that Jesus used in teaching was what? He told parables. And so I was actually reading, and I have a whole book on parables. There's this one of my favorite rabbinic parables is from a rabbi named Rabbi Berechiah, and it's literally called The Parable of the Fat Man and the Donkey. And it's a short little parable about a rather obese man who was sitting upon his donkey. And in the parable, it goes like this rather large man was sitting on his donkey, and the man was wondering to himself, when can I finally get off this donkey? At which time the donkey was wondering to itself, when will this man get off me? And when the man got off the donkey, neither knew who was more happy. That's like the whole parable. It was actually a parable to teach about the Exodus event. When the Egyptians let the Israelites go and the Israelites left, and it was like, who was more happy that they left or that they got to leave? And so that was that parable that was used to teach that. So I wrote a parable, and I'm going to read it. Can I read it to you? And it's going to introduce what I think I want to talk about for the next couple of weeks. And so this is my very first attempt at writing a parable, and I call it the Parable of the Mountain Village in the Rain. So here it is. There once was a village set high in the mountains, along a beautiful gorge. Those who lived within its borders enjoyed its scenic wonder. A slice of heaven they felt, so blessed to call home. They spent their days working the land and planting crops that grew particularly well along the fertile hillside surrounding their village. Each year the spring rains came and washed through the gorge, bringing their life force for which their crops depended. And the rains brought vitality not just to their hillsides and way of life, but they also gathered in rivers through the gorge and ran down into the valleys bringing the necessary sustenance for dozens of other villages that inhabited the valleys below. Year in and year out, the rains would come, and year in and year out, everyone had enough, and all was as it should be. But one year, the rains came a little later than usual. Local mountain villagers started getting nervous that this year's crops may fail. What will we feed our children? People began to murmur. A certain fear and uncertainty set in. What had always seemed so consistent and abundant now seemed like happenstance. It seemed scarce. Now, no one quite knew when it happened or who thought of it first, but an idea began to circulate around the mountain village. Why don't we build a dam? Someone said. That way, the next time the rains come and flow through the gorge, we'll be sure to have enough. Then we won't have to worry if some years the rains come late again. Water will always be plentiful. Our children will never go hungry. And so they built a dam. And when the rains came, they now had enough and then some. They had more than enough. So much water, in fact, that they built a marvelous water park around the dam where their children splashed and played and swam in all their excess water. Life seemed to be even better than it should be. And then one day a visitor came to the village. He had hiked up from the valley below. He brought disconcerting news. Confusion and desperation had flooded the villages below. The rains had come, but the water never reached their fields. They didn't know why the rivers weren't flowing, but their crops had failed. People were hungry, he said. And upon seeing their dam, he sighed, and now he knew why the rivers had mysteriously stopped flowing. He encouraged them, please open your dam. He reminded them the heavens above contain an abundance of water, that even when it seemed like it was coming late or not coming at all, they'd be okay if they just continued to trust. And to this day, it remains to be seen what the mountain villagers will do. The parable of the mountain village and the fat, or not the fat man, the parable of the mountain village and the rain. My first parable. In essence, it's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the village. This week and next, we're going to take a step further in our series, Your Part Matters. And I want to talk about something that I believe is woven into the very fabric of creation itself. And that's why it matters. In other words, I want to talk about how God intended the world to work, the nature of all reality. What I want to talk about, I believe, is an expression of who God is and ultimately what God is like. And when we tap into it, I believe that we find life as it should be. Life as it was always intended for us to live. And I believe in doing so, we unleash the floodgates of God's grace and God's love. In the book of 1 Timothy, we find a letter written to couldn't be more than a teenager, a disciple of Jesus, a young guy by the name of Timothy, written by his mentor and partner in ministry, Paul. And in this letter, 1 Timothy, toward the end of the letter, we find Paul's final charge to this young disciple. And I want to read to you today 1 Timothy 6, 17 and 19, and use that to frame the next couple of weeks, because these are his final parting words in the first letter. Now, there is a 2 Timothy, so there was like a follow-up letter. But these are the parting words of the first letter. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6, if you're following along, says this: "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." Paul tells Timothy a secret. He tells him the secret to tapping in to what he calls and taking hold of a life that is truly life, which might, I guess, kind of suggest that there is a life that may seem like it's life, but it's really not life. If there is a life that is truly life, that we are able to tap into and live, that suggests that many of us perhaps are living a life that might seem like it has a lot of vitality, that might seem like it's very secure and put together, but actually isn't. It's kind of like if we bought something that we thought was really something else, but it turned out to be a fabrication of that. Reminds me of a time, I don't know when, early on in our marriage, when I came home, and I think I bought this pair the way I'm remembering it, I bought this pair of dress shoes. They were like these sweet leather dress shoes for work. And I brought them home, and I was very proud of my leather black dress shoes. And I wore them for, I don't know, many, many months. And it came time, I was like, I think I'm going to go get my dress shoes shined because they're starting to look a little dingy. At which point my loving wife said to me, "Sweetie, those are not leather dress shoes. They're actually what's called pleather." You know what pleather is? It looks like leather, but it's really plastic fabrication. It looks like something. It looks like it's truly something, but it's really not that. And I had bought into the lie that I was wearing these sweet leather shoes when actually I was wearing a fabrication that could not be shined the way leather is. Paul tells Timothy the secret to taking hold of this life that is truly life. Jesus would call this an abundant life in John chapter 10. The secret, Paul says, is in practicing generosity and being willing to share. And so I want to spend a few weeks talking about generosity. Why is it the key to unlocking this kind of life that is really living? Because I believe generosity, as I said in the beginning, is woven into the fabric of creation, where life itself began. And so today what I simply want to do, we'll talk about I want to talk about a theological and kind of biblical basis for living generously and why that matters. And then next week we'll get into some more specifics. Sound like a plan? So today we'll go big, we'll go like 30,000 foot view, and next week we'll kind of zoom in and fly at a lower altitude. As you may know, the Bible begins with the story of creation. And I said, when I said I believe generosity is woven in the fabric of creation, I mean it, because if you look at the opening part of the Bible, the story of creation, it in and of itself, creation is an expression of incredible generosity, isn't it? Is it not? Creation is an expression of God's generous love, because if you think about it, the universe was owed nothing. It wasn't like God was like, "Oh, all right, let there be light. I guess you did." There was nothing owed. And so you're like, well, if it was nothing owed, there was no obligation, then why does it exist? Why would God create? That if the universe was owed nothing, it must mean that God's creation was simply an expression of his essence. And you're like, well, what is that? The Bible, well, God is love, right? That the creation itself was an expression of God's generous love. expressing his essence. And that's why he gave us Jupiter and jacarandas and quasars and quail and all of these things, that all of the created order that we see. It was simply a reflection of God's generous outpouring of love. Nothing more, nothing less. That's it. That's how the Bible begins. And so we have to start there. And so you could say, and I believe this is absolutely bedrock fundamental to our understanding of generosity. You could say that creation itself is an expression of abundant grace. Unearned. Simply gift. It's just a gift. The universe itself is a gift. And you have to start there. It's all given. It's a gift born out of generosity and love. And in the beginning, as we read the story, everything is abundant, is it not? Everything is whole. Everything is good. Everything is sustainable. Everything has enough. And humans are then invited into this story, and humans are given this invitation to keep that story going, to continue to spread God's goodness and God's grace, because it's all gift. But you don't have to get very far in the story, do you, before you start reading a counter-narrative, what I would call a narrative. There is another story introduced into the biblical narrative. You could say a competing story, if you will, and it comes early on. And I would call this story a scarcity story. There's the story, it begins with God's abundance, and quite quickly we find introduced a story of scarcity. It comes from a lie that's told to the first humans, and it basically sounds like this. If I were going to paraphrase Genesis 3, 1 through 7, a familiar passage involving a serpent and a tree and two humans looking at the tree, I would summarize that whole interaction this way with a scarcity story, and it sounds something like this. What God has given you is not enough. So take for yourself, get yours, protect your own interests, build a dam. That's Genesis 3. That's a very different story, isn't it? That is a competing narrative to the truth and the biblical story of who God is and what God is like. We find this competing story. And that's essentially what's rattling around the heads of the first humans, I believe, right before they eat the fruit of the tree. God has said, this is how it works. There will always be enough. He's abundant. You can trust him. There's going to be enough. It's all a gift. So go out and freely spread his goodness and freely spread his grace. But when we begin to question that story, and when we begin to believe another story, it becomes take what is yours. Keep it for yourself. Why? Because there might not be another gift. It might not rain next year. You and I are constantly bombarded in the West with that same mindset, aren't we? Constantly. You could say we find ourselves so often living in a world of scarcity, where fear abounds that there might not be enough, that I might not get mine, that my family won't have what I want them to have, that in having more, then I'll be happy. And when we believe that lie, I believe it leads to selfishness and covetousness. And it builds a dam. It builds what I would call a scarcity dam, because I have to retain what is mine. My time, my energy, my resources, my love, my dreams for my kids, my future, my money. It's all about me. And I think what can happen so easily is we get myopic. We become nearsighted. That's the definition of myopic, right? We become nearsighted, and all we can see is what's right in front of us. All we can see is what I might not have the next time. And it keeps us from just seeing and staring at that and not seeing the bigger, grander story of maybe what's going on in the valley below. God's ultimate answer, then, if we're going to fast forward this real quickly, if you keep reading through, we're in Genesis 3, but now we're going to skip way ahead, because we find that God's ultimate answer to the scarcity problem is to once again act generously. Abigail mentioned it in our communion time. The most generous gift ever given. God continues to give him of himself, and he gives us the gift of himself. The Word became flesh. God so loves the world that he what? Gives his Son this gift. And Jesus enters our world of scarcity, and what does he bring? Abundance, grace, love, abundant love. Because Jesus grew up in a world quite similar to ours. Jesus grew up in a first century world filled with oppression, filled with occupation, and yet Jesus lives with this conviction that there is enough, that God can be trusted. It's going to rain again. You don't have to build the dam. He lives this radically generous life, free of worry. I don't have time to go into all the teachings. Some of you are probably having them spring to mind right now. Where Jesus taught things, they look at the fields, look at the birds. They don't worry, they don't spin, they just trust. They're going to be provided for over and over again. And so Jesus lives this life, this generous, radically generous life leading right up to the very end on a cross. And he consistently talked about our connection to our resources. He taught that it mattered because it was a window, you see, and this is the key. Jesus taught that the way you view generosity matters, and the way you view resource matters because it's a window into your soul. It's a window of something so much bigger. Now follow me here because I want to talk about that bigger thing, and I really think it boils down to this. The bigger thing that I think Jesus teaches, the bigger thing that I think the Bible as a whole is teaching us when it comes to why generosity matters and our perception of generosity and the way we approach it. So follow me here. If generosity is ultimately rooted in who God is and what God is like, and if it is woven into the very fabric of creation as a gift itself, then generosity is never an obligation, it is always a response. That dichotomy right there, if you can get that, my goodness, we can give that to our children. Generosity is never an obligation. It is always a response to grace. It is a response to the very fact that the entire thing, when I'm saying the universe, is a gift. It's all a gift. And so it's all grace. Because I don't know about you, but maybe it's easier to think of generosity as like something I do because I should. Something I do because, I don't know, somewhere in the Bible it says I should. I should be generous. I should be giving. Or I grew up with a preacher that talked about it a lot. And a lot of times kind of said over and over again, well, you should be generous, you should give. And so I you know what? I kind of give slightly out of obligation, that it's something I should do. But I think ultimately we have to root our conversation in generosity back to a grace response, a response to grace. Some of you know the author Randy Alcorn. In one of Randy's recent books, he writes this: God's grace is the lightning and our giving is the thunder. Just like thunder follows lightning, giving follows grace. It is possible to give without a deep understanding of God's grace. It is impossible to have a deep understanding of grace and not give. When we understand and truly believe that God is generous and that everything has been gifted to us, as Alcorn says, it is impossible not to be generous. It is impossible. And that when we choose to be generous, and I'm not just talking about money here, I'm talking about being generous with our love and being generous with our forgiveness and being generous with the grace that we offer other people and being generous with our time and being generous with our energy and being generous with our skills and resources and talents. What we are doing, in fact, is we are aligning our life with the way the universe was created to exist. We are simply aligning our lives with the very fabric of creation. If I had my piece of wood here that I used earlier this year, I'd show you, it's like living along the grain of the universe. I'm living the way it was always intended to be. And when we do that, going back to what Paul wrote Timothy in 1 Timothy 6, it is then that we take hold of the life that is really life. Because we find, oh, this was the way we were intended to live. Recent research shows that wealth and resource in the Western world has reached all-time highs. I don't know if you've checked the stock market lately. It's pretty high. Wealth and resource in the West is not the issue right now. But research also shows that statistically, giving, when it comes to money as a percentage of income, today is lower than it was during the Great Depression. So people are as a percentage are giving less. We have more resource. We have more water. We have an excess of water. And people are percentagely giving less and less and less. Do you know what that tells? I think that is a window. That is a window we're looking through. And you know what the window tells me? You would say, oh, it means we have a generosity problem. No, it does not. We have to go bigger than that. We have to go deeper than that. It does not tell me we have a generosity problem in the West. It actually goes much deeper. It tells me we have a problem understanding grace and gift. We have an understanding of grace problem because it is impossible to have a deep understanding of grace and not be generous. And I think we have to start there theologically, and I think we have to start there in our conversation, start it that way with our children. Scarcity is like building a dam. Scarcity is building a dam that prevents God's grace from freely flowing to us and flowing then through us, and flooding the world with His love. It always has and it always will. But practicing generosity, you know what that's like doing? That's like breaking the dam. That's exploding the dam. It is and I believe that generosity is a subversive, rebellious act. It is subversive. It is rebellious in our culture because it says no to the lie of scarcity and it says yes to God's abundance. It says I'm not living that story of scarcity. I don't have to build the dam. There will be enough. I can trust that. It's going to be okay. It allows God's grace to freely flow into our lives and then through our lives, ultimately to others. And when we realize the depths of God's grace in our own life, we can confidently say this: I have everything, and therefore I'm free to give everything. Because I have it all. And so generosity I think it matters, because it breaks the dam that says there's not enough and that you better hold on tight to what you have. And in doing so, you know what it does? It sets you free. And it sets others free too. And it blesses others. Your generosity matters because it allows God's grace to flow to you and then through you. And in the context of the church, it allows the same. We are called to live a very different story, one that ultimately trusts in God's goodness, generosity, and abundance. Amen? We're called to tap in to grace. Allow grace to bring the lightning that brings the thunder. Allow grace to be the lightning that then leads to the boom of generosity of giving, whatever that giving might be in your life today. I mean, think about that the next time we pass the baskets. I think what we need to start saying is we're about to bring the thunder. The lightning is God's grace. We're basking in it. Now let's bring the thunder. Bring the boom and see what God won't do. It matters. It matters. It fuels our mission. Last Sunday, I think is that enough? I've got like 3 more pages, but no. That's enough. Sometimes I have this voice in my head that says, just shut up. It's the Spirit. So I'm going to heed that voice right now. That's enough. That's hopefully a theological, biblical foundation. And next week we'll just get more specific. Last week I was standing right here, and we were praying, and people were coming up. And I had this lightning flash in my head that said, Give somebody in the room an unexpected gift today. Pour out grace on someone in the room today. That's all I heard. And in my head, then I heard, pay the bill. And then I was like, Lord, how much? Please don't say 10 grand. Please don't say student loan. Who's got the biggest student loan by hand? And we're going to pay that today. Well, that would have been amazing. So I was like, okay, Lord, lightning flash. I'm trying to practice this listening prayer thing that those young guys are talking about at the men's retreat. And I'm like, but now I'm standing in front of the whole group, and I got a mic on, and I'm saying stuff, and I got to be careful here. So I'm like, Lord, what is it? And I just felt like it was like $200. I like $200, I don't know, something like that. And so if you were here last Sunday, I just said, is there anybody in service that something unexpected happened this week? You got a bill or something for like around $200 or something like that? And you all just looked at me like, nothing. Oh, great. Sometimes I hear wrong, and I'm like, oh, the thing, and it could have been what blah, blah, blah. But then I'm standing right here, and I hear behind me, I think it's me. And Denise, Curtis, says, I think it's actually me. And so, Denise, can you come up? Denise is going to share that story about what was happening last Sunday, what happened last week with her, and then what we were able to do. Because I had this like flash of grace, lightning, like grace, pour out grace on someone, and then we brought the thunder. And so let me grab you a mic. I had that handheld somewhere. Anybody remember? Oh, I put it over here. If you don't know Denise Curtis is my son's kindergarten teacher. But long before Henry existed, we have known Denise and her family, as many of you have, for well over a decade, and it's been an absolute joy and blessing to our church family. And so Denise is just going to share really quickly about what happened last Sunday with generosity. Did I turn it on? Hello? Denise on?
Okay. Since he brought Henry up, I'm more comfortable in front of little people than big people, so bear with me. I'm going to be nervous. So, yes, I did come in, and a part of last Sunday that was even beyond a financial blessing was that just being with you guys. And when Jacob mentioned talking to you guys, I thought kind of like what he was saying in his message today, and I told him he needed to inspire me to get up, and he did fine.
Well, thank you.
But the generosity that our church family brings is not just financial generosity, but our church family brings generosity of love and time and kindness and bearing each other's struggles and each other's joys together. And I'm just super thankful to be a part of a church like this.
Amen.
So yes, last week, my car wasn't starting well on Monday and Tuesday, and I knew it was probably the battery or the starter that I needed to get looked at. So I did that on Wednesday and got my oil changed, and it was about $200. And I was thinking, this is not $200 that I have to spend right now. And I also need my car to be to run well, because I'm driving out to Nevada and back on a regular basis right now. So anyways, it was a big blessing when Jacob extended that. I was standing with Deanne, and I said, well, my battery went out, and it was $200. And then Deanne helped me be bold and say, I did replace the battery for $200. So you guys were above and beyond generous, and I feel thankful and loved, and I'm grateful for you guys.
Thanks, Denise. Thank you. So after Denise shared that last Sunday, we just put a basket on the way out, and you guys put $290 in there. And it was still coming in online. And so not only were we able to be generous and just take care of this battery, but we had excess that we could use for others, and that we could pour out in our compassion, whatever it might be. That's just how it works. It's how it works, and we do this together, and it was a beautiful thing. I love generosity stories. I had just finished preparing these notes on Friday evening, and we went out to dinner. Why were we out? I don't know. Well, we were just scared. We were all over the place getting stuff for our house and whatever, and we go to Panda Express because the kids wanted Panda. And we're like, all right. So I'm in, that line there of Azusa. I'm in that long line, and it's crazy, and it's Friday night, and the place is packed, and I'm done with the week, and I'm just feeling like, I just got to sing a sermon and whatever, and I go up to pay, and I'm like, we don't have the money to pay. We just spent so much money at Lowe's trying to get doorknobs for our house, and I got to pay another when you have 4 kids and feed them, and then I go to pay at Panda, and the lady goes, oh no, this guy just paid for you. right in front of me. I look up, Mark Wu. I know the guy. I taught his kids at Foothill Christian. It's like, he just looks at me and he winks. He goes, I got you. God is so good. He's just so individual. It's like Saul was like, I'm just, Panda's on me. And how much? Well, okay, the amount didn't matter. Panda's cheap, but it didn't matter. I looked at him. I said, Mark, I'm preaching in 2 days on generosity as an outpouring of God's grace, nothing else. You just showered grace upon me. Thank you. And he said, he's so good. And he went off to a movie with his wife there at the theater. I love those things, generosity. Anybody else got one like that happened like recently where you're just like someone just blessed you? It was just like a unexpected outpouring of generosity. It could have been money, could have been time, could have been something. I don't know. Someone fixed your car, or whatever they did. Janice, would you tell us? I know. You're like, this is spontaneous, but this is what we do. Because I love generosity. Well, we got to tell a few more stories because it proves that what I'm saying up here in the line.
Well, it was several months ago. Is this even on?
Wayne, can you turn it on?
Anyways, we were having some car problems, and rather than bother my mom to borrow the money, we just left it in our driveway, and Aaron was taking the bus to work. And one day my mom calls me and says, can you bring the car over to the shop? And I was all, well, if I can find the key. So I found it, and make a long story short, she had made arrangements with the mechanic to repair the car. And they called me and said, well, these are the things that need to be done. I said, well, you need to talk to my mom since she's paying for it. And so they called her, and then later they called and said, it's all done, it's all been repaired. And when I asked them what had done, they had done a whole list of things, and it had been about $1,700 repairs that my husband and I couldn't pay, which my mother had done for us.
Beautiful. Thank you. Somebody else? You're just like, I can testify to that. Okay, right here in the front. Give us your name, too, if we don't know who you are.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm new. So I'm a sophomore at APU, but this was like my senior year of high school. And it started in February. I was worshiping.